Hit it.
Well, hello there friends, and welcome back to the Marley Bird YouTube channel. In this video, I get to show you one of my own designs, and I'm super thrilled that I get to do so. I'm talking about the 3-in-1 hand warmer pattern. Now this pattern is written in such a way that you can make either mittens, fingerless mittens, or convertible mittens, all with one pattern. This is a free pattern at yarnspirations.com. I've put a link to the pattern in the video description box right down there below. And while you're down there, please smash that like button, as my kids say. Okay, this is a 3-part series. I'm dividing up this pattern to the cuff, the hand, and the thumb gusset, and then the top of the mitten or convertible mitten or fingerless mitts, whatever you're doing. So the first thing I need you to do is get that free pattern and then gather your materials. We will learn how to get started with the cuff in this video. For those of you who have never looked at a Yarnspirations pattern before, I want to direct you over here to the materials list, and you can see I used 2 different colors of With Love yarn to make this pattern. I chose one solid color of With Love, and then I chose With Love stripes, so that way it looks like I put a ton of work into the pattern when it's really the yarn doing all of the work. Let's take a look at 2 of the colors that I used for the crochet version, but it's the same process. I used the solid color of With Love, and then you can see here the stripes give a really nice look because of the long color changes. So when you combine these 2 with the pattern we're working, you can see it gives the illusion that I put a lot of time changing colors in the pattern when really it's the striped pattern that did all of the work. Just a little trick to make life a little bit easier when you're doing color work, okay? Another thing about this pattern is I wrote it up to be made with double pointed needles. Now, the pattern is written for a set of 4 double points. I prefer 5. You guys know that as you follow the channel. I'm also aware that there are people who are going to ask me how to do it with magic loop. So I have an extra set of needles for magic loop and another set of needles so I can show you how to do it with 2 circulars. All right, so I'm going to start off with the double pointed needles. And so I will grab my solid color yarn and begin. Now, if you wanted to start with the stripes yarn, could you do that? Absolutely. Change it up. You could totally make it your own. I will leave that up to you. To begin, we have to cast on to our double pointed needle, and I will be using the No Cuss cast on. Those of you who've taken my sock video course, you know that I love this cast on for double pointed needles. For those of you who have not, it's simply the long tail cast on. So I have the long tail here, and I will cast on stitches directly to all of my double points. So I will get started here using the long tail cast on, and I will place 9 stitches on this needle because I'm going to use 5 needles. If you're only using 4 needles, you will put 12 stitches on. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Once you get that first set of stitches onto your double pointed needle, grab the next needle, and you have this nice little ridge right down here at the bottom of the needle. Take your second needle and rest it right on that ridge and extend it up just ever so slightly. Make sure your yarn is underneath both needles and carry on with your long tail cast on, only this time place it onto that second needle. What this does is it places these stitches right next to each other from one needle to the next. They are just staggered over, so they don't have a lot of extra slack on them, which helps eliminate any sort of a run in your stitches or a ladder in your stitches. Now I am placing 9 stitches onto this needle. If you're using fewer needles, you will do 12. So 2, 4, 6, 8. So I need 1 more. 9. I'll take my next needle. I will rest it right up next to this needle, just like I did before. Still maintaining control of the other ones. See, I'm still maintaining control. My yarn is coming underneath, so I did not put this one like underneath here, okay? I still have my yarn coming from underneath. I've extended up my new needle, and I will carry on with my long tail cast on, making sure that first stitch butts right up next to that last stitch from the previous needle. And get my 9 stitches on here. And then I have one more needle to do. If you are using 3 needles, you're done at this point, but it's the same idea. I prefer 5 needles versus 4. I just think it comes out easier, but it's a personal preference here. All right, so I'm going to get 9 stitches onto this one. All right, so I have all 9 stitches onto all my needles for a total of 36 stitches. Now here is where the action happens. I'm going to go ahead and place my needles down just like so, and I'm going to cut my tail just so that it's not like super long here, and get that out of the way. Okay, so I have my needles down. My ultimate goal here is I want this first stitch from the first needle to meet up with the last stitch on the last needle. So I'm going to hold the last needle that I used, and I'm going to windmill, essentially counterclockwise, the 3 needles that are next to it. Okay, notice that I had the second, or this needle here that was right next to the last one. It's on top of this one now. Okay, now let me get myself some yarn here out of the way. I'm going to hold this needle. So I held the last one I used. Now I'm going to hold the next to the last, and I'm going to windmill these 2. Again, I want the needle to be on top of the other. Okay, see that? I'm about ready to form a square. Now I'm going to hold this one. I'm going to take this was actually the very first needle I used, and I'm going to windmill that. So now I've made it so that the very first stitch we did is right up next to the very last stitch we did. And I'm ready to work in the round. So what I would do here is I would take my yarn, make sure that it's coming from the center of my square here, right? Because I don't want it on the outside. That's too difficult. The other thing I want to make sure of, let's move this tail. I want to make sure I don't have any twists in my joins here, and I don't. Everything looks nice and even. You'll also notice that because we use the long tail cast on, I have this nice ridge on the inside, and I can see all the purl bumps. So that's the inside of my piece, and I'm ready to go. So I can maneuver my needles so that way I have them, or have the stitches in the center of the needle. I pull this needle back so that these stitches get closer. I kind of rotate these just like so. And I usually will pick up my work at this point and start working, but I'm going to leave it here on the table so that way you can easily see what to do in case you've never done this before, okay? So what I want to do is work in a knit 1, purl 1 ribbing. So in this very first stitch, I'm going to knit. Let's go ahead and get the camera a little bit closer now that I've already oriented the needles. Okay, that's better. So in this first stitch here, I will go ahead, take my 5th needle, or your 3rd needle if that's where you are, and I will go into that stitch, and taking the yarn from that last needle, right, because that's where the yarn is attached, I will bring it up and knit around this first stitch and then off. Now look how loose that is. See how separated that is? We don't want that. So this is where I'm going to take a minute and I'm going to tighten up my stitch. So I do that by just pulling my yarn and wiggling my needle so that way it butts up real close to that last stitch from the previous needle. Now I'm going to put my finger on there to hold it in place, and in this next stitch I want to purl. So I'm going to bring my yarn forward and I will purl the next stitch. And I want to make sure that's nice and snug. Now my needles are all in a position now that I don't have to stress about them, and I can go ahead and continue my knit 1 purl 1 ribbing down my needles. So I'm gonna go ahead and pick up my work from the table. Even though the double pointed needles are hanging, they aren't gonna fall out. And that's because of the cast on we used. They're all nice and snug and everything is in its place. You always want to make sure you're working those first 2 stitches on each needle really nice and snug, so that way you don't get any run in your ribbing or your knitting, no matter what. If you're using double points as you're working around, the first 2 stitches need to be nice and snug, okay? So we're going to talk about that throughout this entire video series. All right, don't panic. I know they're just hanging out there. I will go ahead and carry on working my knit 1 and purl 1 all the way around. And by leaving that tail in place, I know that that's the first needle of my round. So when I get back to that point, I will know that I have finished a round. I don't have to worry about a marker. But if you want to put a marker like on your fabric, you absolutely can. When you get to the end of your needle, what I like to do is I usually will tuck it underneath the needle to the right, and then I turn my work clockwise, right? So here's the needle I'm working on. I'm turning it clockwise. So I'm bringing my next needle in play. I push my needle down so that my stitches are close to the tip, and I carry on. So I finished with a knit, so I'm going to start with a purl here. So I start with a purl stitch. I make sure that's really nice and close. See how I tugged the yarn and I wiggled my needle so it's nice and close. And now I knit the next stitch. Make sure that's nice and close. And now I just carry on. So I'm doing this all the way around. And when I get to the end of the round, I don't have to do anything special. I will just carry on doing my knit 1, purl 1 ribbing. Now, one thing that people usually will panic about when they get to the end of the round and they've never used double points before is that first stitch join might look a little bit loose, and they might be like, oh my gosh, like it's out of control. I don't know what I've done. Everything's super loose. I'm going to tell you, don't panic. It's okay. We have this tail here for a reason. We can use it to close things up if we need to. But if you are really consistent with pulling those stitches nice and snug, you will be just fine at all of your joins, okay? The first couple rounds might be a little bit loose, and that's totally okay. We can close those up later on. All right, so I'm just working my ribbing here, and I will end with a purl 1 right here. If I can, hold on, I got to move my tail out of the way. It wants to be knit in there. Purl 1, I'm going to put that down. Turn. I want you to see here. See how they look a little bit loose? It looks a little bit loose there. Even with the extra pull I did, that loose right there at the start, it's totally fine. I'm not worried about it even a little bit. I will just go ahead and I will carry on, just making sure I keep them nice and snug as I go around. Okay? Pretty easy. First couple rounds of working with your double points, you guys, is tricky. If it's something that you have to give a try for, maybe you do it and it doesn't look good, you rip it out, you do it again, it doesn't look good, you do it again. Like, that's perfectly normal and natural. Go ahead and do that. I did want to point out, I didn't point out this, I'm using the size 7 needles here at the start. So I'm using smaller needles to make my ribbing nice and snug, okay? As you get going, your ribbing will look like this. So you'll have a nice elastic ribbing happening here, and it'll look great. Okay, so that's double pointed needles. If you want even more instruction on how to do the no cuss cast on, I do have a standalone video for that right here on the channel, so you can focus on that a little bit more if you want to. At this point, I want to show you how you would cast on if you wanted to work with magic loop or 2 circulars. So conveniently, it's the same cast on with either one of those, and then you transition into your ribbing. So let's learn how to do that now. Okay, I'm going to use the long tail cast on again, so I will go ahead and place my slip knot directly onto my needle. And for this one, I will cast on all of my stitches onto this one needle. So let's get all of the stitches I want to use onto this needle. Maybe a couple more. All right, so let's say that one. Okay, I just have to stop at some point. All right, so let's say that's the number of stitches you want to cast on. So what I'm going to have you do is take these stitches and move them to the cord. And at the halfway point, so for this, that would be at 18 stitches. So at 18 stitches, I want you to take your cord and you're going to pull it out at that point, okay? Can you see that? How I'm just like pulling it out, like between, all right? Can you see how that looks? So I essentially have 18 stitches here and, well, I didn't divide it very evenly at all, but 18 and 18, right? And I have the cord pulled out. So what you would do now is just like before, we want the first stitch we cast on to meet up with the last stitch. And we're going to carry on knitting across those. So at this point, my work is like so. I'm going to rotate it. So that way the yarn is coming off of what would be the needle on the back leg. All right, so this is my needle back there, and my work is coming off of that one. So on the front half, or the one that's closest to me, I'm going to put those stitches on a needle. Okay. Can you see here? So like if I were to put them both on needles, this is where we would be. Okay. So it's sort of like, that's the starting point. Let me get that out of the way. I'm going to cut my tail. Okay. So I have my working yarn is coming off of the stitch in back. This is where I've pulled the cord out. It's essentially in half between the 2 points. This is my starting point. I will go ahead and take the back needle and pull it out so that way those back stitches are resting onto the cord. And I will use the back needle to carry on knitting these front stitches. So here is my word of caution, okay? Here's my word of caution. If I pull this yarn right here too tight, it's going to make this stitch here go to the size of my cord, and I don't want that. I'll never be able to get that stitch back on my needle. So I will usually be really careful as I knit this first stitch. And unlike my DPNs where I pulled really tight, if I do that, see how it makes that the size of my cord? I don't want that. That's way too tight. So unlike when I work DPNs, I actually need to be very careful about how tight I pull that first stitch there. Okay, so with Magic Loop, as I work this first stitch of the round, I actually am just real careful with how snug I make everything so that I don't pull things too tight. All right, and then you just carry on with your knit one, purl one. I'm going to go down this row and just show you. And I get it, you guys. This is much easier to finagle than the double points for many people. I'm going to get down here. When I get to the end, for me, I will rotate. I keep these needles or those stitches on that needle as I pull this one back into play. So you'll quickly know if you pulled those stitches too tight because you won't be able to get them back onto your needle. So put these stitches back onto your needle. See, I gave it a little bit too snug that first time. Nope, I didn't. I got it. Okay. So they're back on the needle and I'm in a starting position again. My yarn is in the back, onto the back needle. I'm getting ready to knit the front needle. So I pull the back needle out and I carry on to the front. Now, what did I finish with? I finished with the purl, so I'll start with a knit here. I'll start with a knit and then carry on with my pattern. And it's that easy, okay? So you would just keep doing this all the way around. If you wanted to use 2 circulars, it's very similar to what we're doing right here, except instead of having one long circular needle that we use for both sides, we have 2 circulars, one for each side. Now, I will be honest, that's actually my preferred method when I'm doing stranded color work, which is what we will be doing on this mitten. And I will show you why. The reason is really because of that join point. It makes it a lot easier for me to make sure that I don't make that join too snug. And I'm going to show you right now, okay? So it's at this point, if this were going to just continue on my magic loop, I turn my work, and I would put these stitches in the front now that are in the front. I'll put them back onto my needle, and then I would carry on, okay, right? So we would go just like this, and then we would carry on just like we did before. Now, if we're working on two circulars, what would happen here is we would have the stitches on the back on one needle, the stitches on the front on another needle. All right, so you could cast on the same way and then split your stitches up. Instead of pulling the cord through halfway the stitches, you would put half the stitches on one needle and half the stitches on another. So what I'm going to do in the interest of time, I'm going to just slip these stitches onto here just to show you what I want to do. Okay, so I'm just going to slip these on and show you how this works. And like I said, this is actually my preferred. I'm going to put those down so I don't fall off. Using two circulars, I actually prefer it to magic loop when I'm doing stranded color work because I'm able to maintain a little bit more control of the stitch from here to here to make sure it doesn't get super tight. Okay, so now you have a better grasp of how it would look. So this would be as if we were using two circulars. I have all of the stitches. Let's say this is the back of the hand. It's on the red needle. Okay, and all the stitches right here, let's say it's the front of the hand. They're all on the silver needle. Now, when we're doing magic loop, I would pull this red needle out, right? Like pull it so it's on the cord and then carry on with this. But when I am doing two circulars, for the very first stitch, follow along with me here. For this very first stitch, I like to keep my stitches in the back still on the red needle as I work the very first stitch. And I'm going to show you why here. As I knit that first stitch and take it off and I give it a nice pull, see how I am not making that stitch back there go to the size of the cord because it's still on that needle, right? So once I do that on the first stitch, I like to do it on the second stitch, same type reason as when I'm doing the double points, give it a nice pull. And it's at this point that I'll now move that needle so now everything's on the cord. Because I don't have to worry about that stitch anymore. I'm past it. So now I can just carry on. And I'm just using the silver needle. It's just the one needle that is for this side of the mitten. Okay? And as you're doing two circulars, I do like to have two different types of needles that you can see which one is the, like which needle goes to which portion. So like this one, I have silver and red, but it could be two different lengths also. You get to the end, just like when we do magic loop, I turn, I will pull my other needle back into play. So it's just like magic loop, it's just I have two needles instead of one. So it's back into play. And if I was magic loop, I would take this back needle, right? And I would, ooh, my son is coming in. I would take this back needle and pull it off and get started with the front. But when I'm using two circulars, make sure you're always using the same corresponding part of your needle. When I'm using two circulars, I will work the first couple stitches with that needle still in play in the back, just so I can get those first two stitches nice and snug. Then I pull the back needle down and I carry on. Does that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense. To me, that just makes a better join at the break point. And when I say the break point, that's the distance between this needle and this needle. Or if you were doing the circulars or double points, I'm sorry. Like we have 4 break points in here because there's 4 break points. But yeah, so if you're using 2 circulars, I mean, essentially, 1/2 of your cuff is on one needle, the other half is on another needle. If you're using double points, you have a portion of your cuff on each needle. You will go ahead and continue on working in your knit 1, purl 1 ribbing until your cuff measures about 4 inches. You could do it a little bit longer if you want. You could do it a little bit shorter if you want. Totally up to you. I prefer a longer cuff because I like it when the cuff is tucked in to my coat, so that way snow or wind or anything doesn't get inside. But this is your mitten. These are your mittens. You can do whatever you want, all right? So go ahead, finish both of the cuffs, and then you will be ready to carry on to video number 2, and that is where we will start to introduce the stranded knitting and the thumb gusset. I hope you're having fun. If you have not yet, hit subscribe so you are up to date whenever I release a new video to help you become a better knitter or crocheter. I'm Marley Bird, and I'll talk to you again very soon. Bye, everybody.